Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Buckley? Your turn. Maybe someone on this side will try to get an answer from Mr. Buckley on the question of whether he does or does not want the federal government to give people a nutritious meal. But Professor Galbraith.
Well, I would say my question was terminological, something to which William Buckley devotes some 90% of his time finding new words. And
for old sin.
I was merely going to inquire whether he regards as a socialist anybody who is in favor of civilized existence.
I would find it an anomaly to find a socialist who was in favor of civilized experience. I engage in paradoxes with pleasure, the same kind of joy you take in starving Lockheed.
Mr. McGovern?
I allow you that pleasure.
Bill, I was somewhat startled to hear you suggest here a moment ago that you're hostile to the child nutrition programs that we now have in place in this country, which, so far as I know, have always had strong bipartisan support from conservatives and liberals alike. For example, the school lunch program, that's a very important part of the nutritional program here in the state of Mississippi, as it is in other states, was pushed very hard by the former senators.
I think what you're saying is that you like well-fed children. I'm saying that I like well-fed children also, but I'm saying that the presumption in a market economy is that you don't have to go to Washington to feed children.
Well, that's a mistaken presumption.
The whole notion of the round-trip dollar that goes from Mississippi to Washington, spends an expensive night out on the town day, and comes back depleted to do exactly what might have been done by the citizens of Mississippi, is an example of unwarranted interference in the market process.
So what do you say about the what do you say about the hard facts that very careful investigations by the Congress as well as the executive branch, and I stress again, they were broadly bipartisan, revealed 25 or 30 million Americans that were not being fed properly by our free enterprise system. It was to fill that gap that we developed things like the school lunch program.
The anomalies distress me as much as they distress you. Why are there so many people in New York City who are homeless? There have been investigations as to the causes of that. It turns out that over 50% have an alcoholic problem, 30% of them have a drug problem. I simply deny that the same people who will vote vast sums of money to produce huge surpluses of grain won't also feed children who need to be fed.
Ms. Schroeder.
The notion that it has to be a governmental process, I think, is a superstition to which you've devoted much of your life to sustaining.
Ms. Schroeder,
Bill,
quick question.
I brought a little prop, Bill.
Sorry?
I brought a little prop that I want to share with you, and I want to first disclose that maybe some of my discomfort is because you selected Newt as the cover rather than me. But for this great free entrepreneur that you are, you use the Postal Service to deliver your magazines rather than the free market. And
We are obliged
calculated
by the law to patronize it.
No, you're not. I mean, I checked it, and under the Federal Express statutes, it's second-class mail, which it's printed on the cover right here that this is to go by second class. Second-class mail can go by private.
Well,
And I just wanted to show you the difference, and I thought it was interesting that while you don't want to feed children,
one
you're
of the
willing
reasons
to take
we are
the postal.
as impoverished as Mr. Kinsley points out is because we rely on the United States Mail Service, which takes sometimes 7 or 8 days to travel 20 miles.
But you could go right here with the private sector. It's there
If
for
you would
you.
undertake to revive the Pony Express, I
Thank you.
guarantee you the patronage of
Thank
my
you,
magazine.
Mr. Buckley. Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Senator McGovern. Does anybody on that side have any props they'd like to show? Mr. Kemp, you have a question for Mr. McGovern, anyone?
I thought he was going to...
Mr. Gingrich.
I want to say, on the topic of hard facts, as you put it, Senator, It is a hard fact that after extraordinary expenditures, one of the most expensive school systems in the United States, Washington, D.C., has a tremendous dropout rate, and that the New York City schools, for example, have a 45% dropout rate. And I think the point that our side is trying to make is that if you were to look over the last 30 years at the choice of goods and services in the free market and the choice of goods and services in government welfare state delivery, that in fact we far more desperately need reform of the government than we need reform of the free market. And as you look at things like a 45% dropout rate in New York City in the schools, doesn't it strike you that the welfare state needs overhauled more than the marketplace?
Well, obviously there's a need for improvement across the board. I wouldn't argue that the public school system is flawless. I think there's room for improvement. I would suggest to you, Congressman, that the Japanese, who seem to be doing pretty well these days, improving their productivity and competing with us for markets around the world, are putting more public federal funds into education than we are. Presumably they also have a dropout problem, even as we do. But I'm struck by the fact, in trying to figure out why it is that we seem to be losing our one-time productivity edge and our capacity to compete in international markets to the Japanese. Why is that? I'm wondering if one of the reasons isn't the greater degree of investment that they make in terms of gross national product in such things as education and job training and scientific and industrial research of all kinds. I don't think our problem in Washington or elsewhere is the fact that we're spending too much money on education, and I don't think that explains the dropout.
Mr. Camp.
Isn't it, Senator, isn't it somewhat disingenuous to suggest that federal aid to education is the sole dollar comparison between Japan and the United States? Because we spend at the state and local level, and per capita, the American people, with all our faults and with all the faults of education in the most pluralistic, heterogeneous society that mankind has ever known on the face of the earth, spends more money per student and more money per capita than any nation on this earth. And it seems to me to suggest that only federal dollars is the measure somewhat escapes the fact that this country and the taxpayers of America are making a significant effort to educate their children in both public and private schools.
Jack, I wouldn't suggest that at all. I was simply picking up on Congressman Gingrich's terms, where he talked about the degree of federal support for the schools in Washington, D.C. I fully understand that most of the budget for education comes out of the local community, and that's the way it should be. What I'm saying to you is that if you take the total gross national product of Japan and the total gross national product of the United States, they're investing more in public services of all kinds, including education and including job training and cooperation with industry, than we are in this country. Now, one of the reasons for that may be that we've been carrying their defense burden for them all these years. Maybe the time has come for us to suggest to the Japanese and our friends in Western Europe that they carry a little more of their own defense burden so that we can deal with some of our problems here at home.
Thank you. Okay, now is, I think, one of the highlights of our show, as Lawrence Welk might say. Mr. Buckley and Mr. Galbraith, 10 minutes to go at each other. And Mr. Buckley, if you would like to start. Yes, if you would like to.
I have no desire to go after Mr. Buckley, except on the occasions when he's wrong, which is nearly...
Well, he has 4 minutes or so. I'm sure he'll be wrong in a few of them, and then you can go at him.
Professor Galbraith, for a number of years, beginning when in 1970, you defended the proposition in a debate with me before the Cambridge Union that the marketplace is a snare and a delusion. You have been saying things about the marketplace which your colleagues here seem to be renouncing. Now, in an effort to find out whether we should ignore what you have to say or ignore what they have to say, we need a little help. Is the marketplace a snare or delusion?
Oh,
as
by
you
no
call it in
means,
Cambridge?
and I cannot correct your or be responsible for your incredibly imperfect memory. I never said such a thing.
Well, it was a 2-hour television debate seen by several million people, and I'm delighted to record that the House in Cambridge turned you down and voted against you. In any event, you now discover the uses of the marketplace. Let me ask you a second
Could I
question.
interrupt you there? As an economist, I must tell you, my dear Bill, the market has sustained me all my life, so I must sustain it.
Well, if you're saying that there is a
I
reciprocal...
took that from Justice Holmes.
If you're saying that there's a reciprocal affair between you and the marketplace, I would say you've let down your side. But going on from there, we're talking tonight, as I understand it, about presumptions. Now, there should be, I think, the presumption in favor of the private sector. Senator Hart said exactly that. But our concern is that that presumption is gradually eroding so that the presumption is in favor of the public sector. When I ran for mayor of New York, you got up and you said, there's nothing wrong with New York that doubling its public budget won't cure. Well, Lindsay saw you and raised you 100%, and everything in New York got worse. How do you account for your miscalculation on that occasion?
Oh, I certainly concede that I did not at that time recognize, nor did you, nor did anyone else, the enormous costs associated with the compact urban economy with which Secretary Kemp now contends. It's an extraordinarily costly thing. I would remind you, however, that when you ran for mayor, you said that if elected, you would ask for a recount. That I really applaud.
Tracing your career, your prophetic career, we moved to the point in which you told the American people that any reduction in the taxes in the upper brackets would result in sharply decreased revenues. Now, we know that that didn't happen. The top 5% earners in America used to pay 37% of the taxes. Now they pay 43% of the taxes. The top 6% earners pay 51% of the taxes, and even your own son, Professor Galbraith, heartily endorsed the 1986 Act. Is there a generational problem there, or is he undereducated?
No, there is again an error. I have to defend my son. He endorsed the elimination of a great many of the loopholes, as do I, but that there is an association, my dear friend, between the Reagan tax cuts and the present massive deficit cannot, for one moment, be doubted.
Mr. Galbraith, you're now free to go on the offensive against Mr. Buckley.
Yes, I shall ask questions rather than make prefatory speeches.
That would be greatly appreciated.
And what I want to first of all ask you, Bill, am I right in assuming that you're, like the other members of your colleagues here, in favor of government action in general, opposed to government action in general, but in support of it in specific cases? Are you a supporter of the Social Security system?
I would be in...
Yes or no? Yes or no?
No, I would not. I would certainly say that the existing system is obviously unsatisfactory, which is why it has been amended 13 times since it was instituted.
So you would...
Go ahead.
You would abolish Social Security?
Did you understand me? I say that I also recognize the
understand that you're
imperfections
evading
that Congress has recognized in it, which is why they've changed it 13 times.
I understand that you're evading the answer. Would you abolish Social Security?
I believe in a
No,
form of
yes or
Social
no,
Security
Bill?
different from the one which we now have. If it were a Social Security system which were vested and gave people an opportunity to select disparate forms of investment, it would A, improve Social Security, and B, it would build up a bank of useful capital. By the way, Chile is moving in that direction, I applaud, under the tutelage of the best brains of the University of Chicago.
If anybody can really analyze that answer and know exactly where my old friend Mr. Buckley stands, I would like them to raise their hands. We are here with three very distinguished members of the Republican Party, all with aspirations for greater posts in the future. Would you advise them now that we're down here in Mississippi, at no great distance from the great cotton-growing area of the Delta, to abandon price supports in favor of the competitive market?
It seems to me obvious that our agricultural supports are one of the great scandals of the current period. There are approximately 15 to 17% more people farming than ought to be farming, and if we can't face that reality, then we can't face the dynamic potential that's inherent in capitalism.
So you would get rid of...
Just as you're willing for Lockheed to go broke, I'm willing for certain farmers to turn to other pursuits, as they have done throughout the history of the United States, thanks to the rapid advance of technology made possible by competition.
You would get rid of price support, sir. I know there's a certain uneasiness on in the position of Secretary of the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development that I hope is visible to the audience.
It's more difficult, Mr. Galbraith, for politicians to take certain positions because you have created an atmosphere in which it becomes socially outrageous to say plain truths. I'm unhampered by that problem, which is why when I ran for public office, I got 13% of the vote.
This I consider to be one of the phenomena of our time. That tendency to aberration is something which has long been associated with the people of New York. Could I ask one more question?
A quick one.
A quick question. When you are joined with a group as distinguished as the people are with you, don't you feel a little unhappy at the extent of your disassociation from their views?
Yes or no?
You mean, am I having the same troubles that you're having? Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. Mrs. Kirkpatrick, and the negative team may go at her however they wish. Senator McGovern.
Dr. Kirkpatrick, as I indicated here earlier, you said in your last statement that you thought bad things like government programs and taxes should have no role in our economy. When you were a Democrat some years ago, you believed in those programs. You believed in Social Security. You believed in collective bargaining. You believed in Medicare. You believed in federal highways. You probably even believed in the Tennessee Valley Authority. Have you now really turned against those things?
Senator McGovern, no, I haven't turned against those things. I still believe in those things, every one of them, which you mentioned. And I did not say, in fact, I feel quite sure that I did not say that I regarded all government intervention as either a bad thing or unwarranted or unnecessary. The problem is, of course, to identify what government regulation, which government taxes are essential and really necessary, and which are not. All of these questions are prudential questions. I think it is true, as various of you have said, that none of you believes in comprehensive, centralized socialism. There's nobody in the group who advocates a communist system, which is comprehensive, centralized socialism. And there's nobody on this side, I believe, who advocates an absolutely unfettered free market without a security net.
Bill Buckley has come out tonight against Social Security, against
Well,
child
I didn't hear
nutrition, and
Mr. Buckley
against the
say
farm
that,
price
but
support program.
I heard Mr. Buckley say that he thought some sort of Social Security would be necessary, but not the sort that perhaps exists today. That, in any case, is Mr. Buckley's, between you and Mr. Buckley. I would like to say that I think that the issue between us is not between communism at one hand or an unfettered, laissez-faire, Darwinian, Spencerian survival of the fittest at the other end. What the issue between us is really between democratic socialism and democratic capitalism. Question of where you draw the line, whether you regard government's role as a necessary evil or whether you regard it as a good in itself. I suggested you regarded it as a good in itself. I think we regard it as a necessary evil to be referred to where necessary.
Senator Hart.
Well, I just want to go on record saying I don't consider it a good in and of itself. So I want that clear. Others can speak for
All
themselves.
right, no question. You got a question?
Yes, I do.
Please, go ahead.
Let me say, one of the things we've talked about tonight is how thrilled we all are as we watch the communist world become more capitalistic. But let me ask another question. We've got many of our allies that are on our side of the free world fence, such as Argentina, but they have terrible, terrible economic problems because they've been democratic socialists. I mean, when you look at Argentina's economy, most of the problem is because of the state-owned companies. Why have we in our foreign policy not been more aggressive in showing them how to use ESOPs or showing them how to do some of the things that Margaret Thatcher has done? It seems to me she's been more aggressive in peddling capitalism in our side of the fence than we have, and it's kind of embarrassing to see the Polish being ahead of the Argentines.
Well, I don't know, I personally share your admiration for Margaret Thatcher, and I'm sure she'll be gratified to know that you share it. In fact, and it's interesting, too, to note that Margaret Thatcher actually gives a great deal of credit to Ronald Reagan for having set the model for promoting free market systems in the world. She really does. She has done that repeatedly in a lot of very public places. I'm in favor of everybody doing it myself, and I think Argentina is a very good example of a country which very badly needs a big dose of privatization and deregulation and of market economics. Fortunately, so does the government of Argentina.
Professor Galbraith.
Just on that point, I must say I agree with you as regards the much of what you said is about Argentina to the extent they understand it. One of the loads on that economy are the failed enterprises that have been taken over. But what, Gene, would you do about this in a specific way by the government about this massive debt, which is now increased every year by the lending of more money to pay interest? What specifically would you do?
Specifically and in 15 seconds.
Our debt, not Argentina's debt.
The debt of Argentina, Brazil, et al. To the United States or to the international banks, what would you do?
I would extend it.
Thank you. One-word answer. Thank you very much. Pat Schroeder, and who wants first crack on this side? Mr. Gingrich.
Let me say, because I'm fascinated that you think we should extend Reaganomics to Argentina, and you ask why we haven't been more aggressive in promoting those values in places like Argentina. Let me just suggest that Gary Hart pointed out the Democrats have only had control of the White House for 4 of the last 25 years. There's been no Republican speaker in the House since 1954, and I think that Chris Dodd and others who control a great deal of our foreign policy in Latin America would be shattered at the idea that we should be promoting values that they disagree with in America. They disagree with them here.
Is there a question?
No,
I'm just
first
asking.
of all, I know you were very unhappy to hear Gary put that in historical context, because I think in every debate you always say, Jimmy Carter did it, Jimmy Carter did it. You see him in the clouds.
He did do his share.
And I think you also know that the President of the United States, under the Constitution, selects most of the ambassadors and really sets an awful lot of the tone of our foreign policy. And my point was, I think it's interesting that Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping were co-sponsoring conferences on ESOPs, and we weren't. I would have expected Ronald Reagan to have been much more aggressive in trying to help our Latin neighbors, in particular with the high debt, deal with it. And I don't think we have been as aggressive, and it's one of my disappointments in his administration. Isn't it fair? You're so disappointed in Carter. Can't I be a little disappointed in Ronald Reagan?
Let me just ask one quick follow-up. Unless I misunderstood your speeches for the last 8 years, you are recommending that we aggressively suggest to Argentina the policies you systematically opposed in Washington?
Absolutely not.
You did oppose the policies of Reagan systematically.
Well, I opposed the incredible increasing of the debt. Instead of trying to change Argentina to look like us, Reagan was trying to change us to look like Argentina, for heaven's sake.
Mr. Kemp. Mr. Buckley.
You are very much concerned by the size of our debt, which comes to 51% of our gross national product. Are you as concerned or even more concerned over Japan's debt, which amounts to 71% of their gross national product?
Well, I think you know, and I know what the difference is, and the difference is their savings. I would not be nearly as concerned about our debt if we had a higher savings rate. That's why I think Senator Benson's proposal to change the tax code to encourage IRAs for savings is a much better way to go than the administration's to lower capital gains.
Do I understand you to be indifferent? Do I understand you to be indifferent to the fact that Japan is much more heavily in debt than we are after all this talk about how we should be so frightened?
If Japan were using 3/4 of its savings to service its debt, it would not be nearly as competitive as it is. But it's using a much lower percentage of its savings than we are to service its debt. Therefore, it's able to be very, very competitive.
Well,
there's three things. I think there's three things we have to do. We have to get our debt savings ratio more in line, and I think we have to become more productive. We haven't been making the right kind
Do
of
you know what our
investment.
savings rate was for the first 6 months of this year?
I know that our savings rate is still nowhere near what it is in Western Europe and what it is in Japan.
Mr. Buckley,
and that's
It
what...
was 5.5, up from 1.8 a few 3-4 years ago. But the fact of the matter is that American savings are largely invested in pension funds. And
Mr.
indeed-
Buckley, this is not a question. Mr. Kemp is about to have a fit.
I want to
Go
know
ahead.
the Postal
I'm
Service.
not going to have a fit. I just want to add a postscript to the question, which is this. Our tax code still double and triple taxes income. It rewards debt financing and it punishes people for equity investment. Why then do you oppose, given the problem of debt, why not reward equity financing by cutting number one, why not reward equity financing by cutting capital gains tax right now to 15 as President Bush wants to do? And number two, why is it trickle-down economics to cut tax rates, and yet it's not trickle-down economics to subsidize high-definition TV so we can compete with the Japanese?
Mr. Kemp, I think the dirty little secret of the 80s was those tax cuts were really tax shifting. They were tax shifting off the rich and onto the middle class. The middle class is paying a higher percentage of taxes than they were in the 80s. The middle class in this country obeys the rules, pays the taxes, and sends their sons to war. And they've had it up to here. They're like hamsters running and running with their tongues hanging out in the wheel, and they never get up. Now, you're saying, so what we got to do is come up with this new thing that will give the rich even more. I am saying this country is built on the middle class, and the middle class
we all
is
agree.
in trouble.
No more time.
No more time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, Ms. Schroeder. It's time for Newt Gingrich and George McGovern to ascend the altar and go at each other. And Mr. Gingrich will start by asking questions of Mr. McGovern.